Peace, family. Y'all know who it is. It's Bakari Lumumba back once again, the progenitor of LumumbaSpeaks.com, a Black empowerment initiative where we believe we could gain a competitive advantage by always betting on Black. If you're watching, appreciate you out there. Make sure you hit the subscribe and like button as well as notification bell. We're here to talk about rather somber situation, as many of you are aware of what took place, unfortunately, back in May of this year when we had a anti-Black white supremacist, of course, Payton Gendron, go to a restaurant in Buffalo, not a restaurant, I'm sorry, an actual supermarket and gun down, purposely attack Black patrons, gun them down, I think, and if I remember correctly from the article that I read, killing 10, injuring, I believe 3 or 4. So we want to have a conversation about what this means for the Black community, as of course he pled guilty to state charges, accepted life without the possibility of parole, but he's still, of course, eligible for federal charges, particularly hate crimes, so on and so forth. So want to have a rather invigorating, intellectually robust conversation regarding, of course, him pleading guilty, and then, of course, what this means for the Black community. But as you all know, got to go over the ground rules. And the link is in the description, but I also put the link in the chat. Empress Love says, peace, fam, please, peace, appreciate you being part of the live today. So first and foremost, facts over feelings. I think this is of most importance. Number 2, as I've always stated, you cannot use derogatory comments, racial epithets of any kind when you are discussing or describing Black people for any reason whatsoever. That's just not something that I allow. And then, of course, number 3 is that if you make a claim that is patently false, I will cut you off, right? This is my platform, and I don't allow people to come on my platform and make claims that are patently false. So those are my ground rules, 1, 2, 3. But definitely want to get an understanding of what people think about this situation. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of review the report from CNN. I mean, this was on a number of different websites, but I'm going to share this with you all. And as you can see, it says the gunman who killed 10 people and wounded 3 in in a racist attack at a grocery store in the predominantly Black neighborhood of Buffalo, New York, pleaded guilty Monday to state charges of domestic terrorism as a hate crime, murder and attempted murder. Payton Gendron, a 19-year-old white man, pleaded guilty to 1 count of domestic act of terrorism motivated by hate, 10 counts of first-degree murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and a weapons possession charge in a mass shooting at Tops Friendly Markets on May 14th. The charges come with a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the chance of parole. So we all understand that. So people talking about condemning this racist ideology. He, of course, was a white supremacist. He wrote a manifesto stating that his goal, of course, was to harm as many Black people as possible. He even said that he drove over 3 hours to actually engage in the attack. The guilty plea comes 6 months after Gendron using an illegally modified semi-automatic rifle to carry out the mass shooting. Flynn said he got a letter from the defense a few weeks ago saying the defendant was willing to plead guilty. The victims include customers, employees, and an armed security guard, ranged in age from 20 to 86. As we know, this individual was, where the white supremacist was wearing body armor. So the wild part of it, they said that he apologized to a white man during the spree. So once again, this wasn't a random act. At one point, Gendron pointed his rifle at a white man, but did not kill him and said sorry because the man was white, thus further demonstrating the defendant's racially motivated attack. So this is what we're up against. We know Paul Robeson has stated on numerous occasions when he was going through his ideological awakening. Paul Robeson, we know the African-American Renaissance man, said that the battlefront was everywhere. There is no show to the rear. And I think this is, of course, this situation really highlights and illuminates that statement and really shows the truth, the unfortunate truth of Paul Robeson's words. So the question is, what does this mean for our community? He pled guilty, right? And this wasn't a drawn out legal case, right? This happened in May. It's now November. He's pled guilty. He's going to do life without parole. And then, of course, we do know that as a result, he may even face federal charges for hate crimes, so on and so forth. And then, of course, having that illegally modified semi-automatic weapon. So I think there's a lot to unpack here. But the bigger question for me is, what does this mean for the Black community? Is this justice? And then, of course, how do we effectively combat these issues, right? We know that historically, Black life has not been valued in America. We know that historically, we've been the victims and contemporarily been the victims of what? Extrajudicial violence at the hands of police, but also what? We've been the victims of white vigilantism, right? I'm talking about real life Bruce Waynes out here thinking they Batman, right? And so this is a sordid history for us in this country, we could dare say even in the world, because we know that if you're African, no matter where you are in the world, we find ourselves being under attack. And we know that goes to the omnipresent global aspect of anti-Black racism. So once again, I'm gonna put the link in the chat. The link is also in the description, and I hope some brothers and sisters can tap in and we could brainstorm on what does this mean. I mean, I know many of us would argue Second Amendment, Second Amendment, Second Amendment. I agree. I'm a legal gun owner, but this was the individual who had body armor, right? So as we know, the security guard who was armed, of course, tried to defend, of course, the Black patrons. But unfortunately, what ended up taking place is he was shot and killed as well because, of course, he didn't have body armor, and the white supremacists did. So I think this is a serious situation that we really need to discuss. As I stated before, this attack happened in May. He pleads guilty in, of course, November. So that's about a 6-month period in Buffalo, New York. He drove 3 hours, actually scouted the place out. And of course, this was live streamed. He had a helmet on and a camera on the helmet. He had a helmet cam and live streamed the shooting, right? So I think this is the situation where, as I said it before, the great ancestor Paul Robeson taught us, and we know that Fannie Lou Hamer always taught us never forget where you come from and always praise the bridges that carried us over. And I think that bridge that we're really going to be focusing on today is the words of course, Paul Robeson, the African-American Renaissance man, who taught us many years ago that the battlefront is everywhere. There is no sheltered rear. And I think this is a key example of that, right? We've talked about opportunity gaps. We've talked about the wealth gap, the power gap. We've talked about how white supremacy affects us in all areas of human activity. But this is when that truly hits home, and anyone goes to the grocery store, and they aren't able to make it home because you have someone out here wanting to be a vigilante. Well, actually engaging in an act of domestic terrorism. So extremely unfortunate. But like I stated before, the link is in the chat. Definitely want to have a robust conversation with some brothers and sisters regarding what took place and what this means for the Black community. I think it's extremely unfortunate. This is, once again, a senseless loss of life for our community. But we have to brainstorm, right? I personally believe that maybe we have to go out and battle buddy type coalition. You know, this is kind of course drawing on my military background. But the link is in the chat. You want to come on, be part of the conversation, you can. Once again, you can use a pseudonym. So if you work in a job where you will want to, of course, maintain your anonymity, you can do that. Also, you do not have to cam up. So you don't have to cam up to be part of the conversation. But as I said, I do have those ground rules, facts over feelings. You can't make statements that are patently false, but you can give your own opinion. I am a fan of intellectual diversity. I am a fan of diversity of thought. So you don't have to be lockstep in line with what I'm saying or my worldview. But then, of course, last but not least, and probably even the most important, is you cannot use racial epithets of any time to describe Black people, irrespective of their geographic place of origin or proximity or current place. So with that being said, the link is in the chat. As I said it before, I think I've said that about ad nauseum right now. And we want to get the ball rolling. So extremely an unfortunate situation that took place, but we have to look at solutions, right? And it's unfortunate, but I think we're almost at a point to where it's literally almost like the wild, wild west. Almost all of us need to be carrying, right? And I would argue that if someone is wearing body armor, then what we have to do is shoot for the legs, right? It's rather unfortunate because to say that there was an armed security guard there, but unfortunately, what ended up taking place was he's probably shooting center mass, and the body armor was able to repel, of course, his rounds. So just brainstorming in terms of what we can do if we find ourselves in this type of situation, because it seems that these white supremacists who are engaging in these domestic terrorist attacks are going to places where they know there will be a large group of people, right? And so this is something that I think we need to consider and truly look at. But as I said before, the link is in the chat. We'd love for some people to come on, tap in, and be part of the conversation. I definitely believe that we're looking at a era of anti-Black violence that rivals the nadir of race relations that took place, of course, at the turn of the 20th century, typically after Reconstruction, then, of course, prior to and then including the World War II era. So, World War I era, right? So this is prior to Garveyism taking off. So extremely, extremely unfortunate. We know, of course, the nadir of race relations, that term, the nadir of race relations, was coined by Rayford Logan, of course, who was a Pan-Africanist historian and professor at Howard University, who wrote the book, seminal text. If you haven't read it, you should. The Betrayal of the Negro, from Rutherford B. Hayes to Woodrow Wilson, right? So if you haven't read that book, The Betrayal of the Negro, definitely check it out. I'm going to pull it out right here. But he's the one who, of course, coined the term, the nadir of race relations, right? So the Betrayal of the Negro, from Rutherford B. Hayes to Woodrow Wilson. So, and he just taps in and kind of, expounds on why he argues that period, post-Reconstruction to, of course, up until the 1920s, was considered the nadir of race relations. But I would argue that we're in a period that rivals that, because we're just seeing this vehemently anti-Black, not only rhetoric, but also action. The only difference, I would argue, is that now when the white supremacists are engaging in these acts, they are actually being, of course, arrested, prosecuted, and found guilty and incarcerated. We do know that 100 years ago, that wasn't the case. They weren't found guilty. They would go free, scot-free, and oftentimes even be pedestalized by so-called law enforcement. So, but like I said, the link is in the chat. Tap in, be part of the conversation. Payton Gendron pleads guilty in the anti-Black supermarket massacre. We know this is a white supremacist act, a domestic terrorist act, and definitely want to get some people's perspective regarding what took place, what transpired, and why they think it happened. I think we all know that because he wrote a manifesto. But then last but not least, touching on and tapping into what can we do to protect ourselves, right? I know late great Dr. Amos Wilson stated that the true function of education is to secure the survival of its people. I think we're in a situation where we have to be considering how do we ensure the survival of our people when we know that we're looking at external as well as internal factors that are leading to, of course, the death and destruction not only Black people, but our culture and our community. So I'm gonna stay on for a little bit longer, but if no one taps in, of course, I guess this would be a rather short live stream, but definitely want to get some people on, tap in, and then we can have a robust conversation. But I do believe, first and foremost, wholeheartedly, that every Black person in America needs to be a legal carrier of firearms, and we need to be strong advocates, of course, of the Second Amendment. I do know that some detractors would argue that the Second Amendment was created, it was undergirded by white supremacy, and that the Second Amendment was created actually to help white people form militias to keep, of course, our ancestors enslaved. I understand that is 100% factual. However, we're in a situation where we have the ability and the right, and I could put rights in air quotes, to what? Utilize this, and I think that we should. So shout out to Huey Newton, Black Panther Party, Deacons for Defense, the whole nine, who believed, of course, in armed resistance. And if we want to really talk about armed resistance here in the Western world, the death and decadence of the Western diaspora, then we really have to go all the way back to the Maroon societies, right? We have to go all the way back to, of course, the brothers and sisters who engaged in shipboard insurrections during the Middle Passage. And there was over 150 documented. Keyword is documented, because there may have been even more. And then, of course, we want to tap in and discuss what took place while we were even resisting during the barracoons. What in the hell? So somebody playing games, got their feet up in the air. Makes no sense whatsoever. So, but yeah, so definitely tap in, be part of the conversation if you're willing. Because I think this is a real issue, a true issue that we're going to have to address. As many of you know, if you follow me on IG, I've taken my children to the range before, and I've had them shoot, right? So I think this is a definite issue that we need to be cognizant of, because I argue that Black life truly is under attack. And we're talking about internally, when we talk about fratricide, when we're unfortunately harming and killing our own, then of course externally as well. As I've always stated, we are facing, we have two enemies, that's external factors and as well as internal factors. So with that being said, if no one taps in, of course I'm gonna log off, but I'm gonna save it for maybe a couple more minutes. So. But before I go, I would be remiss in my duty if I did not mention today's Black History fact. So today's Black History fact is that on 114 years ago today, the Reverend Dr. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Was born, right? So we know Adam Clayton Powell Jr., he was a member of Congress from 1945 to 1971. He was, of course, the leader and lead pastor of the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem, New York City, which, of course, was one of the famous churches in Harlem, New York City. And, of course, his father was Adam Clayton Powell Sr. So that was today's Black History fact. So just want to make sure that I mention that. But last but not least, Brother Bawana argues, where did the Black atheism discussion go? Did you push it back? Yeah, I pushed it back because I have a brother Dalo Kenyatta out of Chicago. He's a Pan-Africanist. He's an atheist such as myself. He wanted to be part of the conversation. I was going to have him be a featured speaker. So he had fallen ill. So we had a conversation about pushing it back so that, of course, he was able to be at full strength when we had that conversation. So if I remember correctly, I think we're going to have that conversation coming up next Monday, I believe December 5th. We're going to have that conversation where we discuss Black atheism, and we're even going to highlight the brilliant work of one Hubert Harrison, right? So many people may be unaware of Hubert Harrison. He was considered the Black Socrates by many. And of course, he was at one time rival of one of Marcus Garvey, but also he was the one who pushed Garvey and actually influenced Garvey to create the Pan-African flag with the colors of red, black, and green. So many people may be unaware that Marcus Garvey, initially he was going to create the Pan-African flag. He wanted to be, I think, black, brown, and tan or something like that to represent, of course, the different shades of African people. But Hubert Harrison was the one who convinced him to go out and said, no, it should be red, black, and green. Of course, red for the bloodshed, black for the people, green for the natural wealth and land of Africa. So definitely going to have a great conversation there where we talk about Black atheism. Of course, the brilliant work of Hubert Harrison, who was considered the Black Socrates. And then, of course, the next video I'll have, of course, will be where we're discussing, the great debate, Marcus Garvey versus Hubert Harrison. Many people may be unaware that at one point, Marcus Garvey was a student of Hubert Harrison, who was considered to be the preeminent Black intellectual, not only in terms of Harlem, New York City, but really throughout the world, right? He was considered to be a brilliant academic. He was a voracious reader and writer. And of course, he was also a vociferous critic of one of Booker T. Washington. And that, of course, led to him actually being a victim of the Tuskegee machine that led to him living a life of poverty, unfortunately. But we will have a conversation about that another day. But once again, the link is in the chat if you want to discuss the topic for today, which of course is that the white supremacists, we don't even have to say suspect the white supremacists because they were able to read his notes, his diary. Payton Gendron, he pled guilty, of course, to the anti-Black supermarket massacre that took place May 14th, 2022. He received life without parole. So one of the questions we can ask is, should he have been eligible to receive life without parole? Should he have gotten the death sentence, the gas chamber, lethal injection, so on and so forth? And then last but not least, what can we do? We're living in a time that I argue rivals the nadir of race relations. What can we do to protect and preserve African life in a situation in which, unfortunately, we find ourselves in a situation where we're being, of course, victims of not only white vigilantism, real life Bruce Waynes out here, but also, unfortunately, extrajudicial violence at the hands of course, law enforcement. So hope you all could tap in and be part of the conversation. Brother Bawana says, I'm reading Negro with a Hat right now. Yeah, I had that book as well, Negro with a Hat. Learn a little bit more about Mr. Harrison. So yeah, rather interesting tidbits about Mr. Harrison. As we all know, Marcus Garvey, his first wife, Amy Ashwood Garvey, They divorced shortly after they married. And of course, if you ever get a chance to review the divorce papers, it was alleged that she was having an affair with one Hubert Harrison. So that definitely is a conversation that we could have another day. But if you are interested in tapping in, being part of the conversation, as I've always stated, you do not have to cam up, and you can use a pseudonym if you want to protect your anonymity. Tap in and be part of the conversation about what we could do. I'm, of course, a very strong advocate of the Second Amendment, but we do know that, unfortunately, the white supremacists was wearing body armor. So we could have a conversation about how do you combat that if you are carrying, you come in contact with someone who is wearing body armor that wants to do harm to our community. How can you effectively eliminate that threat, right, if the person's wearing body armor? So once again, the link is in the chat. Tap in and be part of the conversation. If not, I'll probably log off in a couple of minutes, but definitely hope we can have a robust conversation about this issue, which is extremely unfortunate. But, I think it's a conversation that needs to be had. All right, so we got a couple people in here, so definitely we need to get the conversation started. So I'm gonna put the link in the chat once again. The guy needed the death penalty. Said the guy needed the death penalty, but I will leave it to the brothers in prison to put in some work. I hear you there. The only concern I have is if the brothers in prison put in the work, and you need to tap in and be part of the conversation. But if the brothers in prison put in the work and they delete him, they will then, of course, get charged with murder. And oftentimes, find themselves in a situation where they're doing life without parole, right? So I think that's one issue that we have to be cognizant of, and we don't want to put it in the hands, because vigilantism, right or wrong or indifferent, irrespective of how we feel about it, puts us in a situation to where if we're caught, if we're held accountable for our actions, we will find ourselves in a situation where we more than likely will be doing life without parole. Brother Ghost, what say you?
Hey, what's going on? Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good. Yeah, so the first question, I'm not really sure, was there like any legal precedent that would have made it so that he would have gotten straight to the death penalty, or what you were asking? Was there
Well,
anything that would have like pushed it to that level, or are you just
typically,
asking the question?
typically what happens in a case like this, there's a mass shooting. We saw this in South Carolina. We've even seen this in a lot of mass shootings that's taking place at high schools. Is they're like, hey, we go to trial, we're seeking the death penalty. If you plead guilty, we take the death penalty off the table. That typically is how it works. But of course, that varies from state to state.
Okay, yeah. So so I'm not too familiar with the laws and everything that's around it, but what I would say, I mean, obviously what he did was something that would be uh obviously a pretty what would you call it? Blanking on the word, but it's an atrocity, right? I think
Yes,
that's
sir.
the word I'm looking for. So yeah, I mean, it's obviously a major atrocity. So I mean, it's yeah, I don't know, I guess, but yeah, like I said, I'm sure there's some sort of laws and things that I'm not really aware of, so I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
comment or go into a conversation. And that's also kind of that's like one of those conversations where it's like, should anybody get the death penalty almost, I feel like. But yeah, I mean, as far if anybody's going to get it, he would definitely be a candidate to get it, I'll say that. But yeah, no, I mean, it's a crazy situation. As far as I think moving more to the next question, because like I said, not too much I could really say about that part of it. The decision is the decision, but moving on with it, I would just say, I mean, really, we have the direct violence situations. You know what the real answer is, and I know this isn't going to be addressed by anyone else for sure, but the real issue is really more with the mental health situation, I think, because I've been thinking about this one and then also with the black guy in the Walmart. It's like it's really, although there's two different motivations, I really think a lot of it is like a mental health situation. Like, although yes, there's the racism aspect, and there's always going to be a racial issue, but I think there is a mental component to it as well. You know what I'm saying? Like obviously everybody else that's racist isn't going out and shooting up the grocery store. So
Right. So what? Okay. So all right, we're gonna pause, time out real quick.
got
Right.
you.
I'm gonna let you expound, but I need to know, why do you think there's a mental health component? Because we know that historically, white supremacists and white supremacist sympathizers, when we look at the history of white supremacy and anti-black racism, particularly here in America, there have been individuals who engage in what? Violent acts against black people, that are individuals who sit by and watch and support it, right? It is, so you don't have to engage in the criminal act to not be someone who supports the criminal act, right? And so I would push back against that, because we don't want to put them in a situation where, oh, he has mental health issues. That's what the real issue is. It's not really racism. He could be racist. No, he wrote this out and said, I'm doing this because I want to kill black people. He drove 3 hours. He scouted the place, right? So I don't think there's a mental health issue here. And just because someone's homicidal doesn't mean they have a mental health issue. It just means it means that they are a violent criminal that needs to be locked up.
Right. No, and I totally agree with you with that. And I understand what you're saying. And I totally agree with that as well. I mean, I'm not trying to push it off to say that that was the primary reason or that was the main thing. But what I'm saying is just that I do think that is a small part of it. Like in his case, obviously it's probably a small part. But and with a lot of the
So
white
this is what I'm going to say. I believe you're speculating, because this man went to court. He had a 730 exam, right? He went through all the checks and balances, and they found no mental health issues whatsoever. So then why would you just throw that in there like that?
Okay. Yeah. So from what I understood from his background, that's just kind of what I picked up. But I get what you're saying. So you're saying that basically, because this guy was like 18 years old, right?
19. If you have a mental health issue, that means you're incompetent to stand trial. That's what that means. If you're competent to stand trial, you don't got no mental health issues.
Okay. So all right. So I don't know that. So, but that's what you're telling me. So it's not because can't you have a mental health issue? Like you could have some sort of mental condition, but you're saying if that's the case, you wouldn't be considered competent to stand trial.
Exactly.
I don't know the law. So
yeah, absolutely. If you have a mental health issue, you would be deemed, because I've seen a situation. Like I told you, I've been locked up before, unfortunately. And I can recall I was in the county, and there was a situation where this Indian guy was from, of course, one of the more prestigious or affluent suburbs in my hometown, was accused of killing his father. The family said this dude got mental health issues. He was on my block, right? That dude had real life mental health issues, and he had a 730 exam, and they deemed him incompetent to stand trial.
Okay, I got you. Yeah. All right, so that answers.
We can't just throw that out there, because we know this always happens with them folks. They do a mass shooting. He has mental health issues. A black person does it, he's a thug. A Latino person does it, it's because they're a gang member. An Arab person does it, they're a terrorist. So we need to have the same energy for them folks when they're engaging in these type of acts.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. I mean, I understand what you're saying. Now I understand your reaction to it for that reason. But okay, I mean, you kind of just shut it down right there. If that's
ain't no mental health issues. He knew exactly what he was doing. So much so that he scouted the place out and then showed up with body armor, a helmet, and a helmet cam on, so that he could live stream to everyone what he was doing.
Yeah, no, and I'm not saying he just like woke up but but I get what you're saying though. What we don't need to keep, going over. I get what you're saying. Like if what you're saying is correct, that he can't stand trial without. And I saw that they tried to dress him up looking crazy. I mean, I peeped all the stuff that they were trying to. They always try to do that. They try to bring him in and they try to make him look like all of a sudden he was looking crazy and they couldn't prepare him to look reasonable for trial and stuff. So I saw all that stuff, but yeah, I was just thinking like in his case.
So let me ask you this: have you ever been locked up before?
No, I've not. Yeah.
Okay, because when you show up to court and you're in custody, that's on you to make yourself look presentable when you go to court, not the authorities in the jail.
But wouldn't the lawyers at least like make some suggestions or try to alter
Well,
his appearance?
once again, but first off, he was showing up just to plead guilty. So right, so you still gonna be wearing jailhouse blues, right? In this case, he was wearing orange. But if you show up for trial and you're in custody, yes, you could wear civilian clothes, but it's on your family members to bring the clothes down to the jail.
Okay.
It isn't a responsibility of the Department of Corrections to get you right before you show up to trial, or to have your hair cut, or you to comb your hair, or you be able to shave. You got to work that out while you're in there.
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I guess I just thought it looked like the legal. I would think the legal defense, since it's such a high profile case, I would think they would try to maybe influence what you look like. I mean,
Well, I
am I
mean, for what?
incorrect?
That he was getting life without parole. Who cares? You know what I mean? He getting life without parole. His life is over.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I don't know. You
I
got
mean,
the
I'm just saying,
experience, you know what I'm
if I
saying?
was in a situation where I knew I was about to plead guilty and get life without parole, you think I care about showing up to the court with a fresh haircut and a shave? Hell no.
No, yeah, no, I know he doesn't care, but I'm saying
I
like
said I
that's
wouldn't
the
either. I don't think anyone of sound mind and body would care about showing up to court looking like a GQ man of the year when they know they're about to do life without the chance of parole.
No, I got you, but I'm saying like the legal, like I would think that, but I obviously I might be wrong. You know what I'm saying? I get
But
what
I'm
you're
just
saying.
saying, one, I'm just put it in context here. If you are about to do life without parole, why would your legal team care about how you're dressed? They're never gonna see you again. You're
No,
doing
I
life
get you,
without parole.
but do you understand where the thought can come into my head if I'm not really familiar with the situation?
Okay,
Because
I'm like, just from a rational standpoint, if I'm doing life without parole, who gives a damn what I look like? I'm
yeah, no,
gone,
I got
out
you,
of
but
here.
they're still representing them. It's still like somebody's. But I get what you're saying. Yeah, I
Because
get
what? How you look isn't going to influence anything. Now,
you.
if
Right.
it's a situation where you're out, right? You're not incarcerated. You plead guilty to maybe let's just say something like domestic violence, right? You're gonna show up, you're going to be suited and booted, so on and so forth. You want to be articulate, well-mannered, clean cut, haircut, the whole nine. They're not gonna understand something like that. But if you're about to do life without parole, meaning your life is over, you can cancel Christmas, Kwanzaa, Yom Kippur, Day of the Dead, Ramadan, everything. You ain't gonna give a damn about how you look in court. My life is over.
Right. I'm actually
Period.
looking at the pictures right now. I was trying to see. Maybe I was thinking of somebody else too. Maybe was it the Colorado guy or was it I might be thinking of something else too, but
Yeah.
I
So,
understand what you're
and
saying
like I
though.
said,
So
unfortunately, I can speak from experience because I've been inside the carceral state before. Most people,
right.
even when they're like, all right, man, I gotta go before the judge today. He gonna sentence me. They already did my pre-sentence investigation because when you see, once again, I'm spilling the tea, right? When you are found guilty and you're already locked up, you're found guilty. They do a pre-sentence investigation, and your sentencing hearing is 3 weeks after you've been found guilty, right? So most people are gonna say, okay, I'm gonna make sure I get a haircut the day or two before. I'm gonna shave. Da 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 da. It doesn't matter because your pre-sentence investigation has already been done, and the judge is going to make the decision based on whatever the pre-sentence investigation team recommends. That's just what it is. I know because I've been locked up before. Like that stuff don't matter at all.
Okay.
The only time it can be beneficial is, let's say you like I said, something colorful. You were convicted of beating some guy up, and then your lawyer might say, hey, show up to the sentencing hearing wearing your work clothes. Right, so then see he got a job, so it'd be better for him to be out because he could then pay the court costs and fines. Something like that might help, but you get life without parole, please. Shit, I show up in that thing in pajamas. Seriously, life without parole, please.
Right. I hear you.
I'd be in my PJs with some flip flops on.
So let me ask you this then. All right, so we got past all that stuff. So what do you think is uh a solution, like as far as what we can possibly do to kind of stop it, since it's basically what you're saying is just, it's just he's set out to just kill black people pretty much. That's just what it is. So like what can we do to, get away from that?
Yeah, so I think one, we can't really stop anyone from doing anything because we don't have the structural or institutional power to make that happen. What I think we can do is put ourselves in a more advantageous situations to where we can, of course, protect Black life, protect and preserve Black life. And to put it plainly, I think the only thing we can do is clap back. Point
Okay.
blank period. I think that's the only solution. As I stated before, this young man had on body armor. So as we know, there was a courageous Black man who was armed security guard. He tried to, of course, take down the shooter. But of course, his rounds were repelled by the body armor. In a situation like that, it's of course someone having a background being in the military, you got to shoot for the knees, shoot for the legs.
Yeah, I was gonna and I'll let I think it's Bawana up here, but I just want to say one other thing too, since you do have the military experience, you might have some experience. And this is like gonna be kind of a dumb question. So but I was just wondering, like, do you think, and I, because I know they're not gonna really be able to do much, but could they increase the security in some of these, like, because it's getting to the point where it's like a legitimate possibility that some crazy guy could just like shoot
Absolutely.
or
But that's on the individual, of course, business if they want to, of course, spend the money from their budget to hire
right.
armed security, more security. They had armed security there, but once again, the dude had body armor. And as we know, oftentimes when individuals are engaged in these type of acts, they have thousands of rounds, and they tend to of course, have body armor. And so that puts them in a situation where they could kill as many people, they can enact as many casualties as possible, while also lasting as long as possible, right? So it's extremely unfortunate, extremely unfortunate, extremely unfortunate. But Bawana, what say you?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Oh, I think that I question what would the what Americans, like in particular Black Americans, perceive as justice. Because it seems like you one of the few people who was actually talking about this subject. The fact that he was sentenced to life in prison. I think that the world is talking about Kyrie Irving. Yeah, it's like, where's the follow through? I knew that there was a lot of anger behind what initially happened, but I would have thought that anger would have been, preserved all throughout this guy's trial to the point that his sentence, and to this day I'm really just hearing a few people still talking about this guy who did this particular act. That's interesting. But what I would say is something that would be helpful is to bring more awareness. You have to kind of like break people out of the matrix, because it seems to me like Black people decides, going to church, going to school, going to their jobs, they come home and watch television, and I feel like a lot of us are not aware of the growing threat that is currently existing in America right now, and the fact that there are people who are well within our community, as yourself. You mentioned in the knees. I wouldn't even think about that. I wouldn't even think about that. We need to try to see if we can investigate all these gun clubs, these proper training clubs around here, how to shoot all these things that's out here right now, where we could get involved in certain situations, whether it's through networking or whatever you have to do to try to better inform yourself and arm yourself as well. So if you was to be put in this kind of situation, you would at least know where to shoot. Yeah, if you gotta shoot the knees, aim for the head. It's like I wouldn't even consider or think about things like that. So imagine Granny, imagine the old uncles. They don't believe in these kinds of things. So I think that awareness is an important thing, and I think that for our people, we need to take it beyond this step of awareness and try to actively involve ourselves with things that could bring at least some form of defense within our communities. I don't know what y'all brothers think about that.
Oh, I would agree wholeheartedly, right? I believe in many states you're still legally able to have a militia, right? And I think we need to have some Black militias,
So can I say something real quick? So with that being said, and I like that idea, but this is what I would say, and this is a question. So you guys have all seen the NFAC thing that happened, right? And you've seen, I mean, you're aware of that, right? Before I move forward.
No, I'm not. Can
Yeah,
you
I know,
elaborate?
but
Okay. So the NFAC, are you're aware of at least the organization, right?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, the NFAC was an organization. Well, it is an organization. I don't know too much about the whole inner workings of the organization and everything, but basically, it's an organization that essentially, and I don't want to say incorrectly, but essentially, the way that what I understand is they're an armed group of black males. The leader was a guy named Grandmaster Jay.
Yes,
He
I'm familiar.
had
Okay, I'm familiar now. Yes.
yeah. So he had the military experience, blah blah blah. And there's other, black gun clubs and militias. I don't know too much because I'm not in anything, but I do kind of keep an eye on it because it's something that is interesting. But yeah, he essentially got into some trouble, which is kind of like an anecdotal thing. But my point is just, is that something where you guys think we could be successful with that? I mean, obviously, gun clubs we could be successful with, but too much show of force with militia, is that something where we're being paranoid if we say that can't work, or is that something that's a legitimate thing where we think it's going to raise concern?
I don't think that there's nothing wrong with self-defense. Self-defense is it's probably not in the Constitution, but I'm certain it's in the law, within the laws of America, that a person has a right to defend themselves, to defend property, or defend other people. You know what I
Yes.
mean? So
Yeah,
I don't
absolutely.
think
Yes. So yes, the self-defense laws in America, you can defend your person, your home, your child, and or
absolutely,
your property.
absolutely. So
Just
I
considered
don't.
a national law. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wouldn't see anything wrong with trying to learn how to properly defend yourself. I think that these kinds of things are important. I don't know where the stigma comes where we are so afraid to learn how to use a weapon or a gun, etc., 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 to
I would
defend
argue that
ourselves.
stigma comes from the church.
Oh boy, thank you. And this is the reason why we need to
Come on
have
now.
I'm sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah. This is the reason why we need to have alternative discussions from the Black atheist community, because the Black atheist community has an alternative perspective, and maybe some people will hear that message and be attracted to it in a different way. Because if we just relying on faith, if we just relied on the supernatural to protect us in the real world, then we gonna be harmed continually. So I think that
Absolutely. And that's part of what's taking place, right? We even know, if you ever get a chance to read the late, great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s autobiography, and you can't mention Dr. King without mentioning Coretta Scott King. Um, but he mentions in autobiography that his aspect and goal of nonviolent direct action was simply a political strategy. It wasn't a philosophy of life, right? And he states this, and when he was having a conversation with one Stokely Carmichael, also known as Kwame Ture, at his dining room table, he says, "This is not a question of if someone breaks in your house, would you use a gun to shoot them?" But once again, the narrative that's promoted is that we need to be violent, so on and so forth. Is unfortunate because we know historically Black people have never been non-violent in the face of anti-Black violence. We've always physically fought off and repelled these anti-Black racists. So this is a narrative that has been created and curated and cultivated by the media, right? And we know, unfortunately, that the media has played a very large role in manufacturing what they argue and call Black values and Black culture.
well, I think that we have the ability to change that with our voices. We have the ability to change that, and I would also say, it just went out of my head, but I would also say that this is something that needs to be reprised within our collective consciousness. I don't think it's there when it really comes against other groups of people. Let me add that as well, because if we do have a culture where if an N word defends me, you know what I mean, I would go to no lengths to harm him back or seek vengeance out on him if
Right.
an N word defends me. But it seems to me when other groups come into our communities, oh, we gonna let the Lord deal with it. You know, I don't understand that. But some of us, not all, some of us. So I think that we need to get past that rhetoric, and I think that we really need to learn how to defend ourselves in any way, even our women, even our children. In fact, because there are people in America who take children hunting. You know, they learn to shoot at 9. They learn to shoot at 9, so they understand the value of life and the value of taking life, you know, and the value of defending themselves. So these are things that our kids need to learn as well, as we exist in the United States.
Absolutely. Brother Ghost.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So, Professor Lumumba, I want to make sure that both of you guys were saying the same thing. So, are you saying that the church, if people are essentially just sitting around waiting on the black church to save them, and that's why they're not, arming up, or are you saying there's some other reason? I just
No,
want to
I'm,
make
I'm
sure.
stating that the black church, of course, has a very strong.
Savior culture.
Yes, they have. There's a culture of nonviolence. There's a culture of turning the other cheek that, of course, is
Okay.
promoted and curated in the church. And then, of course, we know most black people, unfortunately, either they aren't Christians, were indoctrinated by the Christian faith that teaches you that it is somehow immoral to what engage in what self-defense.
Right.
Right. And so as a result, we find ourselves in situations, unfortunately, oftentimes where we are allowing ourselves to be victims when we should and can be victors.
Okay, got you.
That
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm sorry, were you
I
saying something?
no, I also feel like we have a sense of this idea of savior culture. Someone is going to come and rescue us from whatever turmoil we may be in, and I think
Mhm.
that we have taken that and we have put it into different nuances in our psychology. It's like, okay, if Jesus can save us in a supernatural way, but in a realistic way, the police is always going to come. As soon as we call them some white person, it's going to come to our rescue, and it's like we need to. Sometimes I think a lot of us need to have the idea in our minds that we got to do it for ourselves. There's no one going to come and rescue us.
Mhm.
Imagine if you have to start there. You know what I mean? So now the mind gets to start thinking. It's like, okay, if no one is going to come to my rescue, how am I going to go about rescuing myself? So I think that this savior complex that a lot of us have, we gotta get rid of it, get rid of that to a certain extent. We gotta get rid of that. We gotta get rid of that.
Yeah, you're right. That's a popular like talking point I see on social media, but I think you're right. I think a lot of people don't internalize it, they don't put any action behind it. They just kind of hear it. Some people hear it, but yeah, I do agree with that. Whether it's the church or just whatever it is, just spiritualism. I don't even know what it is, but whatever it is, people are waiting on to save them. I definitely agree with that. I mean, because yeah, some of these situations are getting to be worse and worse, and I do think, this guy, I mean, I don't know, I need to look more into his background in particular, but there's some other people where, it's like, there's a lot of like planning and stuff going on, and some of these organizations that are kind of behind the scenes that we don't necessarily hear about, but we kind of know they exist and they're armed up, and we're not. And a lot of us are just naive about a lot of things. So it's definitely a big concern, something that we should be thinking about in a different way. I would agree with that. Although to be fair, there is some movements. I know there's some people I think that are like organizing the different gun clubs and stuff. I think you just need to spread it further and um, make it more accessible. Basically, get the information more out there.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if any final thoughts before we shut it down for tonight?
I'll go.
Well,
And
go.
that
Yeah, you go ahead.
Oh, I'll go. Yeah, can't wait for the greater discussion with Hubert Harrison and Gavi. I really would like to hear those thoughts. And when the Black atheism conversation comes back, but this has been a good conversation. I kind of stopped me from cooking, but I'm gonna go back to cooking and doing my thing. Yeah, but
No
I
doubt,
had to
no doubt.
some support. Yeah. All right.
No doubt. I appreciate it. No problem. Brother Ghost.
Yeah, I don't have too much else to say, but definitely a good, short discussion. Yeah, I don't know if I have too much more to say. Like I said, I probably should read it more on that situation so I can speak a little bit more educatedly on it. But at the end of the day, I think we pretty much summarized this. It's really not something, like you said, it's not something we can really control, but we definitely need to look at what we can do to be more in a position of a more defensible position. So that's about
Okay,
all I gotta say.
no problem. All right, brother. Well, I appreciate you. You all know what to do. Make sure you hit the subscribe and like button. Until next time, I'm out. Peace.
All right.